Seraphine Calloway had never once been looked at directly by the king. Not in the 2 years she had lived beneath his palace. Not in the long corridors she walked every morning, carrying her basket of herbs. Not during the blood moon ceremony, when the golden thread of fate pulled tight in her chest and pointed, with the quiet certainty of something ancient and unashamed, straight at him. She was the pack's only mute healer. She spoke through folded paper notes and the careful movement of hands that knew which plants closed wounds and which ones only pretended to. She was useful in the way a good tool is useful, present, functional, invisible. King Cale Draven stood at the front of the ceremony hall in his dark ceremonial armor, surrounded by generals and foreign dignitaries, and a court full of people who had traveled weeks to witness the moon goddess confirm mate bonds. He was tall in the way that men who have carried grief for a long time become tall, like something in them had to grow outward because there was nowhere left to grow inward. His face was not unkind. That was the part Seraphine had never been able to stop noticing. When the bond snapped between them, visible to those with the sight as a thin gold thread running from her chest to his, he felt it the same moment she did. She knew because she watched his jaw tighten. He spoke before she could move, before she could even decide whether she wanted to move. His voice carried across the entire hall without effort, the way a king's voice is trained to carry. I reject the bond. 3 words, clean, final, delivered without cruelty, and therefore so much worse for it. He continued, and she understood that he was explaining himself to his court, not to her. A queen must speak. A queen must command her guard, address foreign delegations, stand in front of thousands, and make them feel something. A mute healer, however gifted, however well regarded among the servants, could not carry the weight of a crown. He wished her no harm. He simply could not afford her. The golden thread dimmed. It did not disappear. It waited, the way very patient things wait. Seraphine walked back to her basement workroom. She passed 3 people in the corridor who did not meet her eyes. She set her basket on the table. She sat down. She took out a piece of paper, wrote 4 words on it, and held it over her candle until it caught. The 4 words turned to smoke. She went to bed. In the weeks that followed, the palace continued the way palaces do. Loudly, relentlessly, without asking anyone's permission, Seraphine continued inside it. She treated fevers and set bones, and sat with elderly servants through the worst nights of their illnesses, holding their hands and counting their breathing until the rhythm steadied. No one formally thanked her. No one formally noticed her. Which meant she moved through the palace like weather. Rooms did not change when she entered them. Conversations did not pause. Servants spoke freely in front of her, forgetting, the way people always forgot, that the absence of a voice did not mean the absence of ears. She noticed things. She noticed which general visited the treasury on nights when no visits were scheduled. She noticed that the court physician, a broad, self-satisfied man named Aldrich, had begun leaving council meetings early, which was not something he had done 4 months ago. She noticed that Prince Heir, 7 years old, dark-eyed, the kind of serious that children become when they have grown up mostly around adults, was losing weight in his face. She left a note outside Aldrich's door. It described the specific pallor of the boy's skin, the way his appetite had changed, the slight tremor in his left hand she had observed during the midwinter decorating, when he had tried to hang an ornament and missed the branch twice. The note was not answered. She left a second note, addressed to the king's steward. The steward binned it. She knew because she was in the hallway. She thought about what it meant to know something and have no mechanism for making anyone believe you. She thought about it the way you think about a room you cannot enter. You understand the door is there. You understand there is a handle. And yet, Heir kept getting worse. She kept watching. The midwinter feast was the grandest event in the Voran calendar. The great hall was hung with pine and candlelight, long tables set with silver and crystal, the entire court dressed in deep reds and forest greens. Seraphine sat at the back, at the servants' table, eating quietly, watching the boy at the high table push food around his plate, with the specific disinterest of someone whose body has stopped finding food interesting. She had been watching his color for 3 weeks. When Heir stood to leave the table, she was already rising from her seat. When he swayed, she was already moving toward the door. When he collapsed, Aldrich was 12 steps behind her. They moved him to his chambers. Aldrich bent over him with a lamp and his instruments and the professional confidence of a man who had not yet understood that confidence and knowledge are different things. The court gathered outside the door. Cale arrived within 2 minutes, still in his ceremonial clothes, and the crowd parted for him, the way crowds part for men who are used to it. Seraphine stood at the back of the room and watched Aldrich work. She watched him check the wrong things. After 20 minutes, Aldrich straightened and spoke to the king in a low voice, but the room was quiet enough that everyone heard. It was a blood curse. Old, pre-kingdom. The kind documented only in texts from the founding era, which no one in Vorin had opened in 3 generations. He had seen 2 cases in his career, both fatal. He did not know how to stop it. The room absorbed this. Cale stood very still. He was doing the thing powerful men do when the world stops obeying them, staying entirely motionless, as if stillness might buy time. Seraphine walked to the door. The guard blocked her. She held up a note. The note said 3 words. "I know this." The guard looked at the note. He looked at the boy on the bed. He looked at Aldrich, who was standing with his hands at his sides looking at the floor. He looked at Seraphine. He stepped aside. She had never used the full gift in front of anyone. She had spent 23 years keeping it small and careful and disguised as ordinary herbalism, because what it actually was, what it had always been, was something the Church of Vorin had spent 3 generations calling dangerous. She came from the Veilborn line, ancient healers whose voices had been exchanged by the moon goddess at birth. No sound, in return for something far stranger and far more useful. She could hear illness. Not in the metaphorical sense that a skilled physician develops an instinct. In the literal sense, the body spoke to her, each organ, each system, each disruption in the blood, in a language she had been born already knowing. The curse in Lior's blood was speaking very loudly. She worked through the night. She moved around the boy's bed with her herbs and her compounds and her hands, and the room was silent except for the fire and her breathing, and, distantly, the sound of a winter storm moving across the palace roof. Cale sat in the chair beside the bed and did not leave. She was aware of him the way you are aware of something large and still in your peripheral vision, a presence that has chosen not to interfere, which is its own kind of statement. She worked. She had not been asked to be here. She had not been wanted here. She had spent 2 years in a basement room and been told, publicly, in front of an entire court, that she was not enough. She worked anyway, because Lior had nothing to do with any of that, because a 7-year-old boy's blood was speaking in distress, and she was the only one in the room who could hear it. Because this was what she was, underneath all the years of making herself small enough to be tolerated. Around the 6th hour, something in the curse broke. She felt it the way you feel a sound stop, not as a new thing, but as the sudden absence of a pressure you had stopped noticing. At the 7th hour, Lior breathed clearly, then deeply. Then he turned onto his side and slept the way a child sleeps when he is simply tired, not dying, with his mouth slightly open and his hand curled under his cheek. Seraphine sat on the floor because her legs had decided they were finished. She pressed her back against the wall beside the bed. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, Cale was looking at her. Not through her. Not past her. At her, directly. For what was, she realized, the first time. He did not apologize that morning. She would not have trusted it if he had. Apologies offered in the immediate aftermath of something enormous are rarely about the person being apologized to. They are about relief, about the need to release pressure. She did not need his pressure released. She needed different things. What he did first was go to his council. She heard about it the way she heard about everything, through open doors and candid servants and the particular acoustics of stone corridors. He stood before his generals and his advisors and dissolved the policy that had allowed Aldrich's professional refusal to override a documented concern from another healer. He did it on record. He did it in language that named, specifically, what the policy had nearly cost. His voice, from what she could gather through the stone wall, was not raised. It did not need to be. Then he came to the basement. He knocked. She had never been knocked on before. She opened the door, and he was standing there without his crown, without his guard, without the particular expression that kings develop for public consumption. He looked, honestly, like a man who was tired, and had been wrong about something for a long time, and had recently been forced to understand the full cost of it. He sat down across her small table. He took out a piece of paper. He picked up the pen she used for her notes. He wrote something, and pushed it across to her. "What would you need, in order to remain here, not as a servant, but as someone this kingdom owes a great debt?" She read it twice. She looked at him. He looked back without flinching, which she respected more than she wanted to. She picked up the pen. She wrote her answer. Not about herself, not about the ceremony, or the golden thread, or the 2 years she had spent below his floors. Her condition was this. There were Veilborn healers still living in hiding in the territories beyond Vorin's borders, hunted by the previous dynasty's policies, which his kingdom had inherited without revising. She wanted them brought in safely, given protection, given work. She slid the paper back. He read it. He looked up before she had expected him to. "Before you finished writing," he said. "Yes." The golden thread between them did not surge or shine, or announce itself. It simply brightened, the way a room gradually fills with morning light when someone opens a window they had forgotten was there. Not dramatic, just present, and then more present, and then undeniable. He did not plan a second ceremony. He did not make declarations to his court. He came back to the basement the next evening, and the evening after that, and they talked. He spoke, she wrote, and somehow the rhythm of it became its own kind of conversation, one that moved at a different pace than other conversations but landed, when it landed, more completely. She told him, across the small table, about the Veilborn gift, about the exchange, the voice given up, and what she had received in its place. He listened the way that men who are good at war sometimes listen, with total attention and no interruption, as if the information is tactical and therefore deserves respect. He asked, on paper, one question. Did it hurt? She considered this for a long time. Then she wrote, I never knew anything different. It was only ever the absence of something I hadn't had yet. He was quiet after reading that. She watched him think about it, and she did not rush him, because she had never been in a hurry, and because she had long understood that the thing about silence is that it is not empty. It holds things. It has always held things. Other people simply were not paying attention. Lior recovered completely. Within a week, he was running down the palace corridors again, which concerned the kitchen staff and delighted everyone else. He had been told, in age-appropriate terms, what had happened, that the healer from the lower floor had stayed through the night and brought him back from something serious. He received this information with the particular gravity of a child who has already learned that the world is more complicated than he was initially led to believe. He began leaving things outside her door, small drawings mostly, scenes from whatever had interested him that week, a horse he had seen in the stable yard, a bird he could not identify, a picture of what she understood, after some study, to be herself at her work table, rendered in the imprecise but sincere lines of a 7-year-old who was trying his best. She pinned every one of them on the wall above her workroom door. Not the basement door, her new door, on the second floor, in the room with the south-facing window that the steward had arranged without being asked, and with a look on his face that suggested he was aware he owed her a significant professional apology. The court learned what had happened, the way courts learn things, in pieces, imprecisely, the version getting cleaner and more accurate as it traveled. What they arrived at, eventually, was close enough to true. The mute healer had saved the heir using a gift no one had known she carried, and the king visited her workroom most evenings, and when he was in council, he occasionally wrote her notes in the middle of the meeting that were delivered by junior staff who were too professional to comment on the situation, and too human not to find it interesting. The kingdom did not change overnight. Kingdoms never do. The Veilborn healers arrived in stages over the following months. Cautious, accustomed to hiding, gradually less so. Seraphine met each one and spoke to them in the only language she had ever needed, which was the kind that did not require a voice. On an evening sometime in the deep cold of that winter, Kale sat across from her at the small table. They had kept the small table, because some things work well and do not need to be made grand. and he wrote, "I would like to try to deserve the bond I refused. I know I am late in asking." She read it. She looked out the window at the frozen palace grounds, the torches burning orange in the dark. She picked up the pen. She wrote 4 words. "I have not gone anywhere." She meant it as a fact, which it was. She also meant it as the closest thing to forgiveness she knew how to offer. Not the kind that erases what happened, but the kind that decides, quietly, to continue anyway. The golden thread between them glowed warm in the dark room. Neither of them said anything. They did not need to.